The shadow of the Empire that loomed over the greater part of 2 decades ushered in a generation of conflict and oppression that spanned across most of the known galaxy. With the Jedi Order in shambles and survivors being scattered across various systems, the Empire spelled what was perhaps the darkest hour in the history of the modern Jedi Order, known as the Dark Times. While Order 66 all but eradicated the known Jedi Knights, Palpatine was not sufficiently satisfied with the mere collapse of the Order, and he therefore commissioned the creation of an order of Inquisitors, the Force-sensitive Death Squadron tasked with hunting down and eliminating any remaining Jedi Knights from across the galaxy. But who exactly are these Inquisitors? Who joined the ranks of this preeminent execution squad, and how many known Inquisitors embarked on this Jedi manhunt? In this video, we'll be breaking down and discussing every single Inquisitor that exists within Star Wars canon, including the 2 brand new additions in the Obi-Wan show. So if you wanted to find a video that would break down every single member of the Inquisitorius, you found it, as we're going to talk about everyone in detail. With that said, let's begin with the leader of the Inquisitorius, otherwise known as the Grand Inquisitor. We know that the Grand Inquisitor, similar to many Inquisitors, was a Jedi Knight before the Age of the Empire, as he served as a Jedi Temple Guard, and it was even recently revealed that he took part in the arrest and prosecution of the Jedi traitor Barriss Offee, who bombed the Jedi Temple and led to Ahsoka Tano subsequently leaving the Order after being framed for the crime. After his defeat at the hands of Kanan and Ezra, the hunt for the 2 rogue Jedi was taken up by an Inquisitor known as the 5th Brother, but more on him in just a moment. The Grand Inquisitor is the most powerful and skilled of all of the Inquisitors, and was a master of Form 2 lightsaber combat known as Makashi. His speciality was breaking down the lightsaber forms of surviving Jedi, as he was able to deduce exactly who had trained them and the form that they were utilizing within 30 seconds of any given conflict. He was by far the most dangerous and most skilled of all of the Inquisitors, likely having the most formal training as a Jedi. He is also unique as he turned to the dark side of the Force before the collapse of the Jedi Order, and served Palpatine before the Inquisitorius was fully established. Directly beneath the Grand Inquisitor was the second sister, formerly known as the Padawan Trilla. Trilla was merely an apprentice when the events of Order 66 came to pass, and she was able to evade the shadow of the Empire for a short time with the help of her master, with her master being Ser Junda, though the survival was short-lived. Upon Ser being captured by the Empire, the Imperials elected not to have her executed, but instead, they exposed her to the rigorous torture that they had at their disposal, demanding that she revealed the location of her Padawan. Ultimately, Ser would break under the pressure, selling out her Padawan Trilla, as she was betrayed by the one individual that swore to protect her at all costs. This ultimately would lead Trilla to the dark side, seeding feelings of betrayal and rage. These feelings soon led to her being corrupted by the dark side fully, and she was ultimately reconditioned to become one of the most dangerous Inquisitors, second only to the Grand Inquisitor. Her most difficult challenge from her days as an Imperial hunter was battling Cal Kestis on numerous occasions, coming close to killing him multiple times. She would finally meet her end at the hands of Darth Vader himself as a result of her internal conflict. During the events that would lead to her death, Trilla had been tempted to forgive her master, and was actively working towards purging the dark side from herself and returning to the side of the light, which Vader could not allow. The third sister, despite being so generously ranked, is one of the newest additions to the galaxy far, far away, otherwise known as Inquisitor Reva. Little is known about the third sister as of now, though it is apparent that she is set to come into direct conflict with none other than Obi-Wan Kenobi during his exile on Tatooine, and his expedition to Daiyu, roughly 10 years since the fall of the Republic, though it remains to be seen what comes of this encounter and what ultimately becomes of Reva. Although little is known about her character at this moment, the Kenobi trailer gives us some clue as to what we can expect from her, and the Inquisitor requires a bit more out-of-universe research, as the Kenobi trailer is her only canonical appearance thus far. Reva seems to be an incredibly cruel hunter based on her treatment of the citizens of Tatooine, and actress Moses Ingram has gone on record to state, quote, "Reva is a boss," said Ingram. "I mean, really like a full-on athlete. She's on a mission and will conquer that at all costs when given the opportunity. She is pretty badass, and has a badass outfit. Putting on a cape was a dream I didn't know that I had. I felt like I was 10 again. It was super dope. In the trailer, we see a body hanging from what is presumably a noose as she interrogates the citizens of Mos Espa or Mos Eisley, using fear tactics and even igniting her lightsaber to get information. Given this cruelty and the demeanor of which she seems to threaten the innocent bystanders of Tatooine, it seems likely that she will be a character who is willing to take any means necessary to accomplish her goals. It might prove to be a ruthless Jedi hunter, though her backstory remains to be seen. The fourth sister is perhaps the Inquisitor with the fewest feats to her name, and is more widely known for being impersonated rather than accomplishing anything on her own accord. This took the form of the Rebel Alliance commander Lena Graff coming into possession of the fourth sister's armor, and using it to pose as the Inquisitor for a time, even going so far as to infiltrate Vader's castle on Mustafar. While the canonical fate of the fourth sister is not presently known, it appears as if she was one of the weaker ones, and has few notable accomplishments to her name. The fifth brother was among the survivors of Order 66, and served as a Jedi Knight before the fall of the Republic, though much like the Grand Inquisitor, his name is not currently known. The fifth brother often elects to take a far more brutish fighting style than the Grand Inquisitor, and opts to take a more blunt approach to solving his problems. He enjoys eliminating his enemies at the first opportunity, and for this reason, he has been known to be ostracized by his teammates, as they consider him, to put it politely, dumb. During his rigorous training regimen with Darth Vader, he lost his hand, but still impressed the Sith Lord to the point where he was asked to accompany Vader on a quest to hunt down Jedi Master Eth Koth, meaning that Vader likely held the fifth brother above many of the other Inquisitors. While it was ultimately Vader who struck down the rogue Jedi, the fifth brother was able to uncover the traitorous actions of the unnamed Twi'lek Inquisitor, which he ultimately reported to Vader, proving his loyalty. The fifth brother's next notable assignment was taking up the hunt for Ezra and Kanan after the death of the Grand Inquisitor aboard the Sovereign, and across his crusade he was often accompanied by the seventh sister. He led the pursuit of the Ghost crew after the Grand Inquisitor's demise, and would hunt the crew until his death at the hands of Maul on Malachor, where not only he would finally perish, met by a true master of the dark side, but so would the seventh sister and eighth brother. But more on that in just a moment. The sixth brother is often regarded as the black sheep of the Inquisitor regime, and it was once a former Jedi known as Bill Valen, who escaped the brutality of Order 66 only to fall into the hands of the Empire as an Inquisitor. Trained under the same regime as the result of the Inquisitors, Valen was one of the most cowardly Inquisitors who had very little social interaction with his brethren, and was often berated for his lack of will, making him one of the weaker of the group. In one particular instance, he and the ninth sister were paired together for a mission, wherein they found themselves surrounded by purge troopers. In order to escape, however, he elected to cut off the ninth sister's leg and leave her for dead, favoring his own life over that of his teammate. While competition and conflict were not uncommon among the Inquisitors, it was seldom taken to this extent. This type of behavior might have been common for a Sith Lord who was enacting the rule of two, but for a legion of Inquisitors who were set to work together towards a common goal, this was highly unusual and largely frowned upon by even Vader himself, who called the eighth brother a coward. The eighth brother would later come to meet his end at the hands of Ahsoka Tano, who was able to kill him without her use of the lightsabers and with her bare hand, using the Force itself. Ahsoka later repurposed his lightsaber crystals and was able to purify them of their dark side essence, giving way for her two iconic white lightsabers that she would use throughout the course of her Imperial era and beyond, with the eighth brother being considered one of the weakest Inquisitors, and frankly, the rest of them were glad that he was gone. Much like the fifth brother, little is known about the life of the seventh sister before the age of the Empire, though she too has been reported to be a survivor of Order 66 and a previous member of the Jedi Order, believed to have been a Padawan. Working alongside the fifth brother fairly commonly, the seventh sister and the fifth brother grew to develop a mutual respect, as well as an efficient working relationship with one another. Though perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the relationship is that she and the fifth brother was their mutual desire to replace the Grand Inquisitor after his death, each vying for the opportunity to become the new Grand Inquisitor, with these two presumably being some of the most powerful after the deaths of Trilla and the Grand Inquisitor himself, spots 1 and 2 respectively. Though the Inquisitors were not technically Sith, they were taught in the ways of the dark side, which entailed honing their senses of greed and their desires for power to augment their strength within the Force. This competition resembled the rule of two in that they both sought to prove themselves worthy of inheriting the mantle of the Grand Inquisitor by whatever means necessary. though they would seldom come into physical conflict with one another. The seventh sister's visionary conflict with the fifth brother often led to her sense of tactical prowess and his lust for dominance to conflict with one another, though they respected each other as partners and generally cooperated until their eventual defeat at the hands of Maul on Malachor, neither accomplishing their goal of becoming the Grand Inquisitor. Accompanying them during this duel was the eighth brother, who is perhaps one of the most elusive Inquisitors, as not only is very little known about him, but he seems to have very few notable accomplishments to his name, other than the fact that he was sent directly to hunt down Maul. It is known that the eighth brother intermittently worked with the fifth brother and seventh sister on their quest to hunt down Kanan and Ezra, and he too would meet his end on Malachor, leaving all three to lose their lives in one fell swoop. However, we learned that he was sent on the planet directly to hunt down and locate the surviving Maul. As a particularly abrasive and impulsive Inquisitor, his job was largely to weaken and wear down an opponent before his associates joined the fight, allowing the three of them to overpower an already exhausted enemy combatant, though this impulsive streak would lead him into direct conflict with Maul, where all three of the Inquisitors were tasked with hunting down the Ghost Crew, and ultimately all three meet their end. The ninth sister was a Dawatan, who previously went by the name of Masani Tide, a gifted member of the Jedi Order with a particular affinity for reading people and understanding empathetic connections with the fabric of the Force. As a survivor of Order 66, she would go on to live underground for a considerable amount of time, before ultimately being captured by the Empire, who saw great use in her gift. Much like Ser, however, the master who trained the second sister, the Empire elected to subject her to rigorous torture instead, as they tortured the ninth sister for some time. This pain eventually led her to being corrupted by the dark side, and she used her once benevolent powers of emotional connection to serve the legion of the Inquisitor. The ninth sister has shown a particular affinity for enduring immense amounts of pain, as she lost her eye to Vader and a leg to the sixth brother, yet still pressed on. The last confirmed sighting of her was during a duel with Cal Kestis, and the ninth sister is presumed to have fallen to her death, though given her pain tolerance and incredible stamina, it's possible that she may have survived this fall. The 10th brother was previously a member of the Jedi Order, but while many Inquisitors were Padawans or younglings at the time, the 10th brother was a fully developed Jedi Knight of the Order, and even a Master, by the name of Proset Dibs. Much like Barriss Offee or Count Dooku before him, Dibs was one of the Jedi who became disillusioned with the views of the Order, questioning their motives during the Clone Wars and the sanctity of the Jedi Code. The strict dogma of the Order meant that he was unable to explore the answers he was searching for, and at one point he attempted to assassinate Jedi Master Windu, solidifying his fall from grace and his solidification as an agent of the dark side, believing that ultimately the Empire was a better cause than that of the Clone War. His opposition to the Jedi acting as warriors acted as the crux for his fall to the dark side, and eventually he was brought into the fold of the Inquisitors as one of the most seasoned warriors of the New Order. The 10th brother met his end at the hands of the Purge Troopers, who were clones of the Old Republic who had been repurposed for various other uses under the Empire's rule, being the last batch of clone troopers. A Jedi Padawan was able to reprogram a legion of Purge Troopers, forcing them to enact Order 66 against the Inquisitors, and the 10th brother was among the victims of this rather clever hack, leading him to die just as many Jedi had before him by the hand of the clones. Though these are the 10 named Inquisitors, there are other instances of known Inquisitors being present, though their exact titles have yet to be confirmed to us. During the expedition to hunt down Eth Koth, Vader and the 5th brother were accompanied by an unknown Twi'lek Inquisitor and an unnamed female Inquisitor. The Twi'lek had a particular sense of duty and followed his orders respectively without fully agreeing with the vision of the Empire. He even went so far as to develop a romantic attraction towards the previously mentioned female Inquisitor, and this compassion was widely uncommon for the agents of the dark side. His compassion and his inner conflict led to the 5th brother reporting these abnormalities to Vader, who confronted both unnamed Inquisitors after the death of Jedi Master Eth Koth. The two formulated a plan to assassinate Vader in order to escape the grip of the Empire, though this predictably failed, and both were executed at the hands of the true Dark Lord. This brings the Inquisitors to 12, and we approach our final Inquisitor, who too is unnamed, and we only see a few brief frames of her in the Kenobi trailer, as she too is present there. this is perhaps the most elusive Inquisitor of all. While it can be inferred that this is likely the 11th sister, this has yet to be confirmed as of now. But there you have it, my friends. All
acolytes of a galaxy far, far away, and welcome back to the channel. Recently, with the release of the Kenobi series, we have gotten a lot more insight into the lives of the Imperial Inquisitors, as well as the Inquisitor culture within their own order, a sub-order of the Sith. The entire lot of them are ambitious, backstabbing conspirators that would just as soon kill one another on their own as they would a Jedi if it meant advancing within their ranks or their power in the dark side. Anything to garner the praise from Lord Vader. This harkens back to how the Sith acted back in the days of old during the Old Republic era. But of course, it is very important to note that despite their similarities, the Inquisitors are not Sith. Darth Sidious is quite attuned to the rule of two and stands by it, and treats the Inquisitors as little more than Force-gifted lackeys that he can sic on the remaining Jedi of the galaxy, just so Lord Vader doesn't have to. Unlike the Sith, the Inquisitors are bound to the hierarchies and the ranks within the Empire. As far as the grand scheme of things are concerned, the Inquisitors as a whole is just another branch of the Imperial military, just as much as the Stormtrooper Corps is, just with special ranks and privileges, as well of course of the sole task of hunting and killing Jedi. The Inquisitors was structured in a number of set ranks that was likely based on accomplishment rather than raw power and connection in the Force. However, that is exactly what we are come to talk about today. For this video, we will be restructuring the 12 Inquisitors we know of in canon and ranking them in power based on what we have seen them do. So without further ado, let's rank the Inquisitors based on their power levels and determine who is the weakest among their ranks, as well as the most powerful. First though, according to our analytics, a lot of you guys that watch the channel haven't actually subscribed yet, so if you've been enjoying the content and want to stay up to date with everything Star Wars lore related, force crush that subscribe button. Now, students of the Force, let's begin with our assessment. Just to quickly get them out of the way, we begin our list with the lowest two Inquisitors that only briefly appear in the Darth Vader comic book run, but don't actually accomplish much of anything. In fact, they do quite the opposite. We don't even know their names or their ranks, but one was a black-skinned Twi'lek male, and the other was a ren-skinned female from an unidentified race. The two Inquisitors accompanied Lord Vader on his mission to kill Jedi Master and former council member Eth Koth, as well as his family. The two Inquisitors, though, were uninterested in their roles as Inquisitors, and were much more infatuated with each other romantically. The male showed more anti-imperialistic affection and desired to escape with his female cohort. The female Inquisitor was ready to run away with him as well, and offered to kill Vader so that they'd be free. This treason ultimately resulted in them both being executed by Lord Vader himself. This goes to show just how foolish these two Inquisitors were, that they thought that they could even stand up to the might of their master, or that their master would ever let them go freely. This is why it is so difficult to place these two members, but we are firmly placing them here at the bottom of the list. The next Inquisitor we'd like to mention is the sixth brother, who was dispatched so quickly and easily we had to place him here at the bottom. It was from his lightsabers that Ahsoka had gotten the red crystals and purified them in order to make her new silver-colored blades. As I'm sure many of you well know, there are very few naturally occurring red kyber crystals, and as a result, many Sith have either synthetically made their red crystals through Sith alchemy, or they take their Jedi kyber crystals and put it through a process known as bleeding. When a Darksider bleeds a crystal, they go through a careful and rigorous process of pouring all their hatred, pain, and malice into the lightsaber crystal during an intense meditation. If it is successful, the crystal will turn a deep crimson color, as it is now begun to bleed. It is only when a light side wielder takes a red crystal and heals it through the Force with compassion and love will it heal, and the color ultimately turns to white. Anyway, during their meeting and confrontation, Ahsoka used the Force to pull the kyber crystals out of the sixth brother's lightsaber hilts, causing them to become unstable and then explode, in his face actually, killing him nearly instantly. Again, this is against an unarmed Ahsoka Tano, and not an Ahsoka Tano from the Rebels era either. This is an Ahsoka Tano who has just barely survived the events of Order 66, and the sixth brother put up little fight against Ahsoka despite her being unarmed. For the next Inquisitor, we are placing the fourth sister. This is the green-skinned Inquisitor we see accompanying the Inquisitors in live action in Obi-Wan Kenobi. She is seen at the Inquisitor headquarters and in the background of a few scenes while hunting Kenobi at the time of the this video, we have yet to see her show any skill in combat or perform any notable feats or useful tactics in the show. The only other media that she appears in is a mission to Fortress Vader. In this comic though, we don't really see her do anything other than go in disguise, and she fails in that mission too. With the fourth sister failing in the only 2 missions that we know of her, we place her here on the list until further evidence is provided. What is important to note though is she has presumably lasted several years as an Inquisitor. Moving up, we have the 8th brother. Much like a few of the others, the 8th brother was one who exemplifies more than anything else one of the main problems that Sidious had with the Inquisitorius, that being their incompetence, with the 8th brother being one of the most incompetent of all. Being tasked with tracking down Maul on Malachor, he instead finds himself facing Kanan, Ezra, and Ahsoka Tano. Rather than making a plan, he instead attacks all 3 Jedi head-on, using just his lightsaber and explosives. Without gaining any ground with his initial attack, he instantly retreats and calls in the help from the 7th sister and the 5th brother. We don't really get to see much of his martial prowess as he spends most of his screen time running away. This is exactly how he dies, as Kanan manages to damage his lightsaber, which causes him to plummet to his death. Speaking of the 7th sister, she is next on our list. Despite her intimidating visage, cunning action, and persistence, we can't help but place her rather low on our ranking. The 7th sister is definitely the brains of her duo with the 5th brother, but lacks enough skill to finish off Kanan or Ezra, both of which are technically at the Padawan level in terms of skill and power at the time that the 7th sister faces off against them. However, it should be noted that the 7th sister is clearly more competent than the other Inquisitors listed on this list so far, and it is at this point in our rankings that we will experience a pendulum shift, as the Inquisitors actually now have become viable threats. Still though, the 7th sister is bested by an unarmed Ahsoka, and meets her end alongside the 5th and the 8 brothers on Malachor at the hands of Maul, who brutally dismembers her with his lightsaber. Despite her lack of notable accomplishments or even skill in combat, the 7th sister at least deserves some notable recognition for her persistence, as she is one of the few Inquisitors that we've listed so far that is fully dedicated to the cause and absolutely tries her best, which is more than we can say for the other early entries on the list. Up next, we have the 9th sister. Finally moving towards the better half of the Inquisitors, the 9th sister is first introduced to us in Jedi Fallen Order, as she serves as a secondary antagonist next to Inquisitor Trilla. Being a female Dowatan, she is a hulking individual with immense strength and a massive lightsaber to boot. She is a brick wall and a very intimidating Inquisitor compared to the others, and would easily strike fear into any Jedi that she lay her eye upon. Unfortunately though, it seems as if her physical strength and hulking physical might is the only thing that we can speak of as a positive way for this Inquisitor. The 9th sister serves best as a sidekick and is usually just taking orders rather than acting out her own plans. She relies far more on her muscles than any brains or technique in the realm of the Force. Brute strength is the farthest thing from making you a formidable opponent in the Star Wars universe though. Due to this, she is little more than an obstacle for Cal Kestis, a dragon to be slain if you will. Her lack of forward planning is actually the entire reason that Cal escapes from Trilla in the first place, when he first encounters the Inquisitor, as the 9th sister opts to simply drop him off the side of the ledge rather than ensuring that Cal is dead. Although to some this seems like a sound plan, Jedi are known for being able to survive great falls, and not only an Inquisitor, but a Force wielder herself. The 9th sister should know this, and should have better known that just to drop him off of the edge and out of her line of vision would not be enough without at least stabbing him with her lightsaber first. Now though, we are heading into the big hitters of the Inquisitors. For the next one, we have the 3rd sister, Reva. Some of you may be surprised that she is ranking so relatively midway in our list, but hopefully our reasoning will make sense to you. At the time of this video's release, we are past Kenobi Episode 3, and despite it being known that Reva is quite capable, she has demonstrated herself to be rash and impulsive, not to mention to have been dominated by the Force by the other 2 Inquisitors on numerous times, especially the 5th brother. But we cannot deny that despite her impulsiveness, she is at least cunning and resourceful, as well as one of the most intelligent Inquisitors by far. Reva is intelligent about her deception when her martial skills fail her. She is also apparently obviously very talented in Force insight, able to sense when someone is fearful or has some form of information that she wants to know. She does this when she was able to pick out Owen Lars from the crowd, as she could feel through the Force that he knew something, even if she couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. She can get the impression when people know things, and when she really needs to, she can probe someone's mind through the Force and extract the information manually, a feat we have also seen Kylo Ren do. It is clear that Reva's talents lie in the more intellectual, psychological sides of the Force than rather brute strength and martial skill, which though, ironically, makes her the perfect fit for an Inquisitor. And I would also like to point out that Reva very well could move up far higher on this list when the Kenobi series concludes. And now, students of the Force, we have reached the final four, the truly formidable group of Inquisitors. Taking the place right above Reva is the fifth brother. We place him right above her due to his power in the Force as well as his physical abilities. In Star Wars Rebels, he was mostly depicted as being another brute strength character without much else to offer. However, in Obi-Wan Kenobi, we see a much different side of the fifth brother. Like Reva and the seventh sister, he deeply desires the role of the Grand Inquisitor and is ready to do anything to get it, even believing that he is next in line. It's been speculated that he is actually, in terms of ranks, the second highest ranked of the Inquisitors. Although Reva's power and persuasion and mind probing make her effective at what she does, she can still be easily dominated by the powers of the fifth brother through the Force, who demonstrated he could break her Force shield and subdue her while reclined in his chair. Therefore, we place the formidable fifth brother above Reva on our list. Now it is time for us to discuss Trilla, the second sister. If anyone deserved the role of Grand Inquisitor, it would be she. Cunning, powerful, intimidating, and very strong in the Force, Trilla serves as the main antagonist in Jedi Fallen Order, coming antagonizingly close to killing Cal Kestis multiple times. She is the perfect combination of strength and cunning. Fierce and relentless, she feels like an indomitable foe every time she makes an appearance in the game. Her lightsaber skill is very aggressive and far more effective than the other Inquisitors who seem to just get tossed around in a duel. Trilla is strong and agile, and her powers in the Force leave little to be desired. Of course, we can't help but mention that she does get most of the character work out of all of the Inquisitors that we've seen so far. We also get the impression that of the Inquisitors, she is one that has suffered the most. By the end of her story, we truly get a feel for her, and in true Star Wars fashion, she becomes a very sympathetic villain that nearly turned back to the light side before she was brutalized by Darth Vader for that only sentiment. Interestingly enough, she was considered by a few of the other Inquisitors to be stronger than the Grand Inquisitor, but of course that wasn't something that they shared out loud. That may surprise you to know that our number 2 spot is the 10th brother. Appearing only in the comics, the 10th brother was once a Jedi Master named Proset Dibs. Although completely blind, he was regarded by Mace Windu as being exceptionally powerful in the Force and mindfully insightful. In fact, he was handpicked by Mace Windu for a special mission during the early days of the Clone War. During the mission, Master Dibs would continuously express his objections for the Jedi going to war, and detested their new titles as generals, much to the chagrin of Mace Windu, who was also having these secret feelings but trying to bury them under the sense of duty to the Republic. This boiling confrontation came to a head when Master Dibs uncovered the truth of the nature of their mission and confronted Mace Windu about it. He would go on to rant about how he truly felt about the whole war, and how he wanted to defect from the Jedi and have no part in the role that they were about to play. After Windu asked if he was done with his tirade, Master Dibs punched him in the face. The two, though, then engaged in a lightsaber duel, and despite Dibs being blind, he was still very much a capable warrior, keeping up with Windu for the most part of the duel, though of course in the end, he was ultimately bested. Sometime later, he would become the 10th brother in the Inquisitor's ranks. In the end though, he would ultimately be killed when his purge troopers turned against him, as the inhibitor chips were activated within their minds by a Jedi, causing them to mow him and several other Inquisitors down. We place the 10th brother so high on the list due to his known power as a Jedi Master prior to falling to the dark side of the Force, as well as his ability to compete with Mace Windu for a time, a feat that no one else on this list can boast. The 10th brother was a Jedi Master. And now, number 1, the Grand Inquisitor. This most likely comes as no surprise to any of you, as the Grand Inquisitor is that for a reason. Powerful, skilled, and ever so bloodthirsty for Jedi, he leads the Inquisitors and reports only to Darth Vader himself. The Grand Inquisitor was once a Jedi Temple Guard, who had become disillusioned with the Jedi following the trial of the Jedi Padawan Barriss Offee. Barriss, who gave a passionate speech about the state of the Jedi Order, touched the heart of what would become the Grand Inquisitor. As a Temple Guard, he had been present for that hearing that had been ordered to escort her to her prison cell. Talented in the Force as well as in lightsaber combat, the Grand Inquisitor spent an extensive amount of time poring over the Jedi archives to study their combat styles and learn everything he could about the Jedi in order to make himself the perfect hunter for them. He could analyze somebody's lightsaber dueling style in a matter of seconds, deducing that Kanan Jarrus was a utilizer of Form 3 Sarisu. He also has defeated Kanan and Ezra on multiple occasions, not to mention that he has presumably been a Jedi nearly as long as the 10th Brother has. Instead though, being tasked with the protection of the Jedi Temple. The 10th Brother is also the most skilled master of the Inquisitors' lightsabers, and the variant that the Inquisitors possess, using it masterfully against the Jedi. He's also the Inquisitor with the most recorded Jedi kills under his belt. So therefore, here at the channel, we believe that he deserves this #1 spot. And so did Vader, as he gave him the rank of the Grand Inquisitor.
What's up guys and welcome back to the channel. With the release of more information on the Kenobi series, we are getting closer and closer to finding out what we are in for. We already know that Vader will be making a large appearance in the show, but one of the things that is a possibility for us is the appearance of multiple Inquisitors, including Moses Ingram, who will be playing an Inquisitor known as Reva, as well as confirmed appearances from the Grand Inquisitor as well as the 5th Brother, who are both prominently featured in Star Wars Rebels. With this show taking place after the events of Revenge of the Sith, Jedi are still being actively hunted down by the Empire, and are now all but nearly extinct. Vader was usually the one doing this cleanup job initially, but we do know that he had help from the Inquisitors. In fact, the Emperor got to a point with Vader that he recalled him from hunting down Jedi and discouraged him from becoming far too fascinated with hunting down and killing the Jedi in order to help him rule more closely with the Empire that had already been established, focusing on the future and not the past, leaving the job of Jedi hunting to the Inquisitors due to the fact that at that point in time, Palpatine saw the task as menial and beneath Lord Vader. At this point in time, we currently know of 11 Inquisitors in canon, and today we would like to cover what we know of each of them, as well as analyze why they were such efficient hunters in Vader's stead. So welcome back to the channel everyone, and let's delve into the history, combat prowess, and the 11 different Inquisitors. First though, according to our analytics, a lot of you guys that watch the channel haven't actually subscribed yet, so if you would like to stay up to date with everything Star Wars and Kenobi related, force crush that subscribe button. To start, it is worth mentioning that most, if not all of the Inquisitors were once Jedi themselves. Jedi who had defected from the Order prior to the events of Order 66 and the Jedi Purge. They did so through various means, be it enticement, capture, or excessive torture. The Inquisitors were brought to the dark side by Palpatine initially, but later by Lord Vader. Vader was the one who was primarily tasked with training the Inquisitors in the ways of the dark side, as well as hunting down Jedi. Vader aimed to cut the Inquisitors from their more defensive fighting styles of the Jedi and make it only offensive. The end result was an aggressive fighting style that aimed to quickly overpower and overwhelm surviving Jedi, hampering their concentration and preventing them from falling back into their Force abilities. Vader believed that this tactic would work, as the tactic was actually quite similar to the likes of General Grievous. Overpower and overwhelm as quickly as possible before a Jedi can fall back into their sequences, using fear and the dark side to their absolute advantage. Most of the Jedi the Inquisitors would be hunting would not be masters, as most of them had fallen to the clone troopers or had been killed by Vader directly. Vader was brutal in his training methods and wanted them to be as prepared as they could and as soon as possible to hunt down all of the remaining Jedi. Vader accepted no failure whatsoever, which made training more like part 2 of their own torture. One of Vader's first training sessions with them, including teaching them loss. He did this by expending at least one of their limbs, such as the 6th Brother's left forearm, the 5th Brother's right hand, and the 9th Sister's left eye. One such Inquisitor who didn't need much training from Vader, if any at all, was the Grand Inquisitor. The Imperial Inquisition ranks went from the greatest to the least by way of a number system, which also gauged the Inquisitors based off of their power level and skill. Number 1, of course, being the Grand Inquisitor. Unfortunately, we know very little about his past as a Jedi, What we do know, however, is that his name was Rakesh Thanos, and that he was in fact a Jedi Temple guard. Rakesh was disenchanted by the Jedi Order after listening to the speech given by Barriss Offee during her trial, this being the origin of the Grand Inquisitor. Rakesh later left the Order shortly after this and went out on his own. Being a part of the Jedi Temple means that he was a part of the sect of the Jedi Order known as the Sentinels. The Sentinels were very different from other Jedi paths, combining methods such as street skills with the Force. Sentinels lived amongst the public and were highly adept at blending in. After Order 66, many Jedi Sentinels on their run turned to the dark side, or were ultimately hunted down by the Inquisitors or Vader. Palpatine, among any other Jedi, wanted the Sentinels gone as soon as possible, as they were specifically trained in hunting down and destroying any remnants of the dark side or Sith artifacts, as well as being extremely adept at hiding. This is quite ironic, considering how the Grand Inquisitor would go on to hunt down and destroy any remnants of the light, but his past as a Jedi Sentinel likely helped him in tracking down all of the remaining Sentinels that had managed to survive the initial stages of Order 66. Just like all Sentinels, Rakesh was incredibly skilled in lightsaber combat and Force ability. He was ruthless in the pursuit of the Jedi as well as the Rebels, sporting the standard issue rotating double-bladed lightsaber given to all Inquisitors. The Inquisitors employed many of their talents and techniques to find the Jedi stragglers. The Ninth Sister, for instance, was gifted with reading emotions, which gave her an edge during interrogations whenever mind probing wasn't working. The Inquisitors also had another method with taking down more highly ranked and more esteemed Jedi, such as once locating their target, grouping up, and overwhelming their opponents with an onslaught of unrelentingly aggressive attack patterns which often put down their prey. Unlike Vader, the Inquisitors often would hunt in groups like a pack, causing some to refer to them as Vader's dogs. This tactic was effective when dealing with Padawans and low-ranking Jedi Knights as well, but often was thwarted by more skilled and more powerful Jedi and Jedi Masters. We see this in practice as Ahsoka was able to work around this method of fighting, and in turn turn against her attackers. The Inquisitors were unable to defeat Ahsoka Tano or Maul due to the fact that they were far more skilled in their respective arts. Many times, it was Vader who would take on the task of killing the Masters, such as he did with Jedi Master Eth Koth, as the Inquisitors were more suited for lower ranking and less skilled Jedi, not to mention less composed Jedi. Knowing this, I speculate that if the Inquisitorius were to be included in the Obi-Wan show, it is highly unlikely that they will be able to match up to the Jedi Master, assuming they even find him at all. It is likely that there will be a good portion of the show being dedicated to Obi-Wan dodging the Inquisitors as well as the 501st, or whatever is left in it. However, I believe that Moses Ingram's Reva will in fact locate Obi-Wan, but it's unlikely that she stands any match against him besides informing Lord Vader of his survival. There has been a great deal of concept art from Lucasfilm depicting many different planets that the Kenobi series could take place on. I do think that there will be quite a bit of it taking place on Tatooine, as should be expected. However, since to the level of Tatooine fatigue one might put on the Book of Boba Fett and other shows, I do believe that Kenobi will be venturing off of Tatooine fairly early, as we're hearing now that only the first 2 episodes of Kenobi will actually take place on Tatooine itself. We know from the sizzle reel in the interview with Ewan McGregor that he mentions how strange it is for him to walk by and interact with stormtroopers. Of course, he could mean this while he was on Tatooine, but hopefully we will get to watch Obi-Wan navigate the streets of these interesting looking planets while ducking under the radar as he is pursued by the Inquisitors. In the case of the Inquisitors, many of them were ultimately killed off leading into the events of Rogue One and A New Hope, as Vader nor Palpatine saw any use to replenishing their ranks. In the end, Vader and Palpatine would ultimately turn to striking down and killing any Force sensitives rather than recruiting them. The Inquisitors were a means to an end, and once they were all killed, Vader saw no use in training more. The era of the Jedi was coming to an end, with only Jedi such as Yoda and Obi-Wan remaining. Jedi that the Inquisitors would do nothing but ultimately be killed by, as it's believed that Obi-Wan and Yoda could take out nearly all of the Inquisitors, as the Inquisitors were again very low ranks in terms of the Sith and the greater powers of the dark side. Still though, in terms of locating and hunting down Jedi, teaming up in packs, they were highly effective, and the Grand Inquisitor could likely even hold his own for a time against more esteemed Jedi Masters. However, even the Grand Inquisitor was ultimately killed and struck down. And and when encountering the likes of Ahsoka or Maul, the Inquisitors meant next to nothing. Still though, it is slated that Reva will have an important role in the Kenobi series, as she is described as relentless and brutal, even in terms of the Inquisitors. She is obsessed with locating Obi-Wan Kenobi, and although Reva does not appear in any other media besides this, it is likely that Reva will ultimately meet her end in the series.
But what are your Inquisitors, the famed Jedi hunters following the dreaded Order 66 and collapse of the Old Republic? The Inquisitors that paved way for the rise of the Empire and ensured the Empire's continued success, with their sole mission of extinguishing the greatest enemy of the newfound Empire and the Sith, the Jedi stragglers, and survivors of the initial stages of the Great Purge. Every single one of the Inquisitors was former Jedi themselves, turned to the dark side of the Force before the events of the fall of the Republic, or forcefully just afterwards. Wikipedia describes the Inquisitors and the Inquisitorius as follows. The Order of Inquisitors and the Imperial Inquisition was an organization of mysterious Force-sensitive dark side agents who served the Sith-ruled Galactic Empire. Members of the Inquisitorius were called Imperial Inquisitors, or simply Inquisitors, and were also nicknamed the Red Blades. They were tasked with hunting down the remaining Jedi who had survived Order 66 at the end of the Clone Wars, as part of the Great Jedi Purge. They were also tasked with hunting down and locating any children who were identified as Force-sensitive. These Inquisitorius were governed by the Sith Lord Darth Vader, who was the apprentice to the Galactic Emperor Sheev Palpatine, and led by an individual known as the title of the Grand Inquisitor. Their time following the Great Jedi Purge, the Inquisitors became known as some of the most feared Jedi hunters and killers in galactic history. However, they would eventually die out just around 2 decades after the initial rise of the Empire, leaving only Darth Vader and Darth Sidious as the 2 true Darksiders behind the Empire itself. Among Star Wars fandom, despite their obvious intimidating reputation, the Inquisitorius are described as quite weak, and in some circles even pitiful. And in this video, I would like to break from the norm and explain my opinion on why the Inquisitors are actually weak. And it is also my belief that it is Darth Vader's fault that the Inquisitors were so ill-prepared to fight against Jedi, and at the same time, how Darth Vader could have organized a more powerful group of Darksiders, more prepared to hunt down the Order 66 survivors. Before we talk about the Inquisitors themselves, let's talk about Darth Vader, the primary master of the Inquisitors, and Darth Vader being the individual that retrained the Inquisitors how to battle in lightsaber combat. This issue stemmed from the fact that Darth Vader, who was a fully formed Dark Lord of the Sith, while extremely powerful in the dark side of the Force, lacked in areas such as teaching the methods of the dark side. Unlike his master Sidious, Vader was not a wellspring of knowledge of Sith lore and abilities. He was simply so inherently gifted in the dark side of the Force because of his experiences and his identity as the Chosen One that a lot of the deeper techniques of the Sith were useless to him. Just because Darth Vader is quite possibly one of the most gifted Sith Lords ever does not mean he is adept at teaching these methods. Darth Vader is powerful because of his pure connection to the dark side, something that is not easily taught. Being a fan of the sport of basketball, I'll explain it like this. Just because a player is inherently physically gifted and knows the game of basketball well does not mean they'll be able to relay that information when they one day become a coach. Being a good basketball player does not directly translate to coaching an entire basketball team. This is where Darth Vader stems from. He knows how to use the dark side of the Force. He's a juggernaut in it, but again, his teaching methods are imperfect. But it is far from only Darth Vader's fault that the Inquisitors were not very powerful dark side wielders. It stems from the fact that they were all themselves former Jedi, and as Darth Vader described, they fight like it as well. This is an exchange of dialogue between the Grand Inquisitor and Lord Vader. The Inquisitors are formidable fighters. They are former Jedi, in fact, and they fight like it, defensive, moving to attack only when there is no other choice. The Jedi taught that a battle could be countered a victory if both parties survive. This error has infected the Inquisitors' attacks, and it shows. Beyond simply their lightsaber skills, this weakness also translated to their ability to use the dark side of the Force, as many of the Inquisitors did not inherently turn to the dark side of the Force after the fall of the Republic. Many of them simply turned after being tortured at the hand of Darth Vader. In fact, I would argue that the Inquisitors that turned organically and felt the pull of the dark side of the Force more naturally are the more powerful of the Inquisitorius, such as the Grand Inquisitor himself, who turned to the dark
dark side of the Force after being denied Jedi knowledge. The Grand Inquisitor, even as a Jedi, grew to despise the Jedi Order, specifically Jocasta Nu. His turn to the dark side of the Force was more natural than simply being forced to it. A similar thing can be said by the Inquisitor's second sister, Trilla, who in large part embraced the dark side of the Force after her own Jedi Master Sayer turned in their location, and the location of many other Jedi Padawans, creating a hatred for the Jedi as well as her master, and a more organic connection to the dark side. Therefore, why the Grand Inquisitor and the Second Sister are some of the most powerful Inquisitors in all of Star Wars. Being former Jedi meant the Inquisitors were weak in the dark side of the Force. Darth Vader noticed this when he began training them. Vader aimed to cut the Inquisitors from their more defensive fighting style and make it only offensive. In order to make their connection to the dark side of the Force more pure, Darth Vader attempted to teach the Inquisitors laws, the same laws that he was so familiar with, and the same laws that fueled his power in the dark side. Vader did this by expending at least one of their limbs, such as the Sixth Brother's left forearm, the Fifth Brother's right hand, and the Ninth Sister's left eye, attempting to force them to the dark side of the Force by taking their limbs off one by one, an act that would only partially push the Inquisitors more towards the dark side of the Force, as again, it was not fully on their will that they would turn. So despite all of this, and despite the Inquisitors being relatively weak, why were they so successful? The answer here is also very intriguing. Do not get it twisted. Many of the most powerful Jedi during the Age were either not found during Order 66, such as Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, or many of the other Jedi were exterminated during the initial stages of Order 66, as the clone troopers turned on them. It was after the Inquisitors that were initially introduced that many of the most powerful Jedi had all been wiped out, and much of the Jedi Council, meaning that what was left was simply Jedi stragglers, most cases Jedi Knights, and even more common than this, Jedi Padawans, who many Jedi Masters gave their lives to defend against during Order 66, and an Inquisitor was more than a match for the common Jedi Padawan. There were also multiple stages to an Inquisitor hunting down a group of surviving Jedi, or even a single surviving Jedi. 99% of the time, Inquisitors hunted in packs, with the minimal amount being 2. Therefore, if a Jedi Knight proved to be more powerful than a single Inquisitor, another Inquisitor was not far behind. Only the most powerful of the Inquisitors were seen hunting alone, such as the Grand Inquisitor and the fallen Jedi Trilla. If the Inquisitors came against a threat that was too powerful for them to overcome, they would not hesitate to call in backup, even calling upon the Sith Lord and their master Darth Vader, as we saw in Star Wars Rebels on Malachor, when after the Inquisitors encountered both Ahsoka Tano as well as Maul, they did not hesitate to call upon their master, realizing that they stood no chance. I do not think that Darth Vader failing to train the Inquisitors to the utmost of his potential is inherently a major flaw, however. I'm just saying that this is in large part why the Inquisitors were so weak. However, the Inquisitors also largely served their purpose and were largely successful, something that a lot of people tend to overlook despite them being very weak. At the time of A New Hope, the threat in the galaxy concerning the Jedi is next to nothing before Luke Skywalker arrives. The Inquisitors completely fulfilled their purpose, and they were never meant to be trained to the nth degree. In fact, it was Palpatine's desire for them not to be fully trained, desiring for Vader and himself to covet all of the power within the dark side of the Force. Don't get it twisted, the Inquisitors were always meant to be pawns and never transform beyond that, and pawns are expendable. So although the Inquisitors are very, very weak, they were designed that way.
Throughout the centuries of the Sith rule during the post-Bainite era, the rule of two grew into perhaps the most important and most prevalent doctrine for all future Sith to follow, allowing only one master and one apprentice to rule the regime of the Sith at any given time. A master to hold the power and to covet it, and an apprentice to desire it above all else. As the years went on though, various Sith attempted to break this sacred precedent or bend it to their own will, with some taking on dark side apprentices or Sith assassins to do their bidding, while most blatantly took on a new Sith Padawan before executing their masters, and bringing the tradition full circle, some did not follow this doctrine. During the Age of the Empire, for instance, Darth Sidious and Darth Vader employed a legion of over a dozen sinister assassins factions known as the Legion of Imperial Inquisitors, tasked with hunting down any floundering Jedi survivors and executing any remaining trace of the Old Order that they could find. While these Inquisitors were not formally considered to be Sith in any traditional sense, they were innately strong dark side practitioners with affinities for lightsaber combat and a malicious disdain for the Jedi, making them pseudo-Sith by all logical definitions. However, Dark Jedi seems more accurate. Given the employment of these Inquisitors, however, and this major risk that Palpatine was undertaking by having them, why wasn't Palpatine fearful that Vader and the Inquisitors might seek to overthrow him if Palpatine was offering all of these dark side adepts that would listen solely to Darth Vader, all of these potential apprentices at Vader's disposal? So why wasn't Sidious afraid at all? Less than 2 years earlier, Sidious had ordered Count Dooku to eliminate Asajj Ventress because he believed she posed a significant threat to his rule as a new Sith apprentice, and Sidious believed that she was in fact a viable prospect for a true secret apprentice. So then, why doesn't the same things apply for somebody like the Grand Inquisitor, who may have made the perfect apprentice for Darth Vader and a perfect candidate to one day become a true Sith? Well, today, students of the Force and acolytes of the galaxy, let's explore a few of the reasons why Palpatine wasn't worried about Vader using the Inquisitors as his new apprentices, and why he believed that the Inquisitors, despite being powerful Jedi butchers, were not a threat to his power whatsoever. The explanation is actually quite interesting. First, it's important to understand how Vader's relationship with the Inquisitors differs from something like Dooku's relationship with Ventress, or even Palpatine's own relationship with Maul, who Palpatine took as his apprentice even though he was still under an official apprenticeship by Lord Plagueis. Let's begin with talking about the relationship between Dooku and Ventress. Ventress had a very clear master and apprentice relationship, wherein Dooku offered her continual one-on-one training, teaching her more skills and augmenting her power in the dark side. He taught her the ways of the Sith and the abilities needed to be formally inducted into the Sith Order on a highly individualized curriculum. This was a personal connection that Palpatine feared above all else, as Dooku truly did like Ventress and admired her power, as they became to learn more about each other and developed an ability to work together effectively as master and apprentice. With these Inquisitors, however, their training was not only very limited, but was highly impersonal. They were trained in lightsaber combat and various dark side force abilities in order to specifically hunt Jedi, as this was their sole task. But after they had completed their initiation into the Inquisitor program, they were left to their own devices and sent their own ways with no further training whatsoever, because of the simple fact that Vader did not want to bother with them, and he himself was obsessed with killing Jedi. It's also important to mention that since their training was stifled, none of them were any match for either Vader or Palpatine even altogether, nor were they receiving any further training on how to become stronger, and it's highly unlikely that Vader would even be able to take them under his wing in the first place. During the selection of the Inquisitors, this is something very important, as it seems as if Palpatine had to find a particular level of skill and innate force ability that he deemed acceptable, not too weak to the point where they could not overcome Jedi, but not too powerful so they could ever be a threat to his rule. He had to scour his prospects in order to find Inquisitor candidates that were powerful enough to rival Jedi survivors, but not powerful enough to stand against himself nor Vader. And this meant that while the Inquisitors were lethal to surviving Jedi, they were not nearly as dangerous to someone like the Chosen One or the Emperor of the Galactic Armada, and the culmination of the Rule of Two. We even see this quite clearly in the Kenobi series, when Reva finally chooses to confront Darth Vader. Reva, who is already a talented Force sensitive and lightsaber combatant, has spent the duration of her life honing her skills. She is one of the most aggressive Inquisitors that we have ever seen, augmenting her strength within the dark side as she brutally hunts Obi-Wan and any other remaining Jedi, utilizing inherently violent methods to achieve her goal. She is a gifted lightsaber combatant and a ruthless fighter, yet when she confronts Vader, she is utterly humiliated by the Dark Lord despite her years of practice. One could argue that she is one of the most violent Inquisitors, and a case could be made that she is one of the most powerful, though likely still not the single most powerful Inquisitor to date. Yet, when it comes to Darth Vader, he is able to match her without ever even drawing upon his lightsaber. This is because Reva lies right in that sweet spot when pertaining to her power, and was inducted as an Inquisitor Inquisitor simply due to her inability to face Vader effectively. Here, she was dwarfed by the innate power that comes with being a Dark Lord, as the shadow of Vader's vengeance loomed over her. She is no match for a Sith and has no official Sith training whatsoever. It's also important to note that Palpatine never had any reason to believe Vader had a personal one-on-one training session with any of these Inquisitors, as Vader was continually watched by Darth Sidious's royal guards, with this being a major reason as to why. Vader was seldom able to make a move without Sidious knowing about it, and this stifled his ability to enact the rule of two in the first place, or take on a student of his own. If he had ever been shown to develop a personal relationship with an Inquisitor which went beyond simply being professional collaborators, then Palpatine would have eventually found out, and this absolutely would raise his concern. Here, Palpatine would have acted as he did against Dooku, although this quite notably never happened. Since this never happened though, there was nothing for Palpatine to ever be concerned about in the first place, because the Inquisitors were not receiving any additional training or specific treatment from Vader. Many fans of Star Wars lore underestimates what it truly means to be trained as a fully formed Sith Lord, and the power difference between somebody like Maul and the Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor is a skilled Jedi hunter, but he is nowhere near the level of a Sith assassin like Maul, who has formal Sith training, and therefore places him far beyond any Inquisitor, simply because of the training that he received under Sidious. As long as Palpatine kept his eye on Vader, he would be absolutely sure that he was safe, and he would not be training any of the Inquisitors without Sidious knowing about this. Palpatine kept a long list of contingencies at the ready in case Vader ever decided to turn on him, and this is something that Vader knew about. Not to mention that none of the Inquisitors were naturally powerful enough to overthrow Sidious, and even if Darth Vader banded together with all of the Inquisitors could be turned against instantaneously, as Darth Sidious still had inherently within the clones the ability to enact Order 66, and it's likely that he would have told the clone troopers to enact Order 66 had the Inquisitors ever turned on him. Not to mention that Darth Vader himself is truly vulnerable to Sidious, from the vulnerabilities in his suit to the various Strandcast cloning projects he had operating in the shadows. Palpatine ensured that nobody could threaten his rule so long as he was able to keep Darth Vader in check, especially the Inquisitors. And this is why Darth Sidious never inherently feared the Inquisitors whatsoever. But anyway, my friends, what do you think?
What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to explore the Inquisitors, but rather the ultimate version of the dark side and Emperor Palpatine at the time, and his opinion on the lowly Inquisitors, and ultimately why he decided to implement the Inquisitors into his empire following the events of Revenge of the Sith, and the significance that they play, but ultimately Palpatine's true plans and thoughts about the Inquisitorius. So let us begin. In the formative years of the Empire's reign, there was much to be done to secure their hold on the galaxy in the dust of the Clone Wars. One thing in particular was to clean up all of the stragglers of Order 66, an operation which was spearheaded by Darth Vader. Soon though, the Empire would employ the service of the Inquisitorius to aid in the Jedi hunting effort. Many of the Inquisitors were fallen Jedi themselves, twisted, and turned to the dark side. Despite their notorious reputation, the success of each Inquisitor is questionable to say the least. It should be debated as to whether the Inquisitors were as effective at hunting Jedi as they were at being Jedi. The consistency of their success often varied, with the Grand Inquisitor being the most ruthless and effective, whereas the lower Inquisitors, such as the Seventh Sister and the Fifth Brother, being borderline incompetent. Well, today we take a look at what Sidious himself thought of the Imperial Inquisition. By the time that a year or so had passed since Order 66, the Emperor became less and less concerned with the Jedi remnants, and was far more interested in establishing the Empire's functions, something that he hoped to share with his apprentice, Lord Vader. Vader, however, didn't share in his master's ambitions, and was preoccupied with satiating his bloodlust in relentlessly hunting and killing all remaining Jedi, a fascination that worried Sidious. Despite employing Vader with the full task force of Inquisitors, it felt as though the search was never ending for Vader, and to the point where Sidious had to issue not one, but two commands for Vader to cease hunting Jedi, in order to help him rule the Empire by his side. It may be surprising for some to hear this, but Palpatine was in no rush to clean up every single Jedi. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He had won, and there was no doubt about it. and because he had won, he wanted the Jedi to feel what it was like to have to hide in the shadows like the Sith did for the entire millennia under the rule of 2. The Emperor gained a sadistic satisfaction in knowing that every Jedi was now looking at the galaxy without hope and completely heartbroken, as he had wanted that to fester for a while before giving them their long-awaited death. Due to this, he had Vader personally train the Inquisitors in the dark side in the ways of killing and pursuing the Jedi. To put it simply, Vader wasn't exactly the greatest teacher of the dark side, especially just after Revenge of the Sith, given that he had just briefly been inducted into it himself. His methods of teaching were horrifically brutal, with endless combat training and even going as far as wounding each of the Inquisitors in some way so that they would know the feeling of true loss. His purpose was to break their defensive Jedi fighting habits and get them into the full swing of an overwhelming offense. These were not beings trained to be Sith, but rather force-wielding grunts to find and kill Jedi, and kill them with a brutal, if not overkill, offense. However, for a couple of these Inquisitors, that training backfired, and they had bad habits of tunnel visioning which left them carelessly prone to mistakes in the heat of a duel, especially against more composed force wielders. Many Inquisitors were only really able to destroy Padawans and lesser knights, with more experienced knights and masters being able to easily overpower them. Palpatine would even directly note and comment about the Inquisitors, which we get a brief peek at in the Book of the Sith. In the chapter Ultimate Power, which Sidious had written himself sometime before Order 66, he lays out all of the secrets to manipulating the war, as well as his plans for the future of the Empire. Scribbled in the margins, Sidious comments on his own chapter from 20 years later, perhaps right before the destruction of the second Death Star. A part of the chapter has Palpatine detailing his plans for the Inquisitorius, and Sidious gives his thoughts on the dark side of the Force and these Inquisitors in general. Grand Inquisitor Torben is the latest of these fools to perish. A bomb, a speeder crash, drowning. In death, my Inquisitors are making a mockery of their Empire's infallibility. These comments were made by Darth Sidious from a Legends point of view, but it is believed that he had similar viewpoints to the Inquisitors in canon. He viewed them as even somewhat insulting to the powers of the dark side, even though an Inquisitor was the definition of expendable. This brutally honest review lets us see what the Emperor's true opinions were about the Inquisitors, which seems to be quite low to say the very least. He blatantly calls all of them fools and regards them as embarrassments to the Empire. While I wish to say that this was shocking news, if we look at the facts, it isn't hard to see why a seasoned Sith Lord would ultimately feel this way. In comparison to his and Lord Vader's accomplishments, the Inquisitors appear like children playing with toys. As mentioned previously, the 7th sister and the 5th brother were unable to defeat an unarmed Ahsoka Tano in a 2-on-1 scenario. When Maul joined the fight against them, they had no choice but to retreat. Several of the Inquisitors went rogue, with 2 falling in love and attempting to leave the Empire, which made Vader spend valuable time hunting them down and ultimately killing them just like the Jedi they had hunted. And Trilla, who we meet in Jedi Fallen Order, fails to capture what is essentially still a Padawan Cal Kestis by being repeatedly outsmarted and outplayed. Her emotions were in such turmoil that she too fell away from the Empire and was promptly killed directly by Vader. And as Palpatine mentions in Legends, 3 of them were killed by a bomb, crashing of a speeder, and drowning. The most competent and threatening out of all the Inquisitors was the Grand Inquisitor, who unfortunately Palpatine also mentioned by name and roped him in with the others as fools. Rendering his accomplishments minuscule in the eyes of the Emperor, Sidious finds them all to be poor reflections of the public image of the Empire and the dark side. But with limited resources, he has to work with what he has. It's a possibility that Palpatine doesn't want to spend any more previous time finding and training new Inquisitors, so he just lets the current supply run their course, so Vader stays occupied with the Imperial affairs rather than contributing to Jedi hunting pursuits that Palpatine believes Vader's presence is unworthy of. But friends, what do you think?
Inquisitors are one of the most tragic and misunderstood darkside organizations that have ever existed in the Star Wars lore. They consist of beaten and bruised rabid dogs that have had one purpose and one mind drilled into their own damaged and unhinged psyche, tortured both mentally and physically by the Lords of the Sith. Whether they have embraced the path of the dark side for a sense of revenge, or a hope to achieve a power that the Jedi once withheld from them, their one true reality, even in the shadow of a new vast empire, was to serve and suffer. The fate of many of the Inquisitors has been well documented. Many had raised arms against their tormentors and were quickly eliminated by the domineering and unmatched power of Lord Vader and the grand resources of the Empire, while others have failed in their designed duty to locate and hunt any surviving members of the Jedi that escaped the initial stages of the Great Purge. What is quite compelling about the Inquisitorius and the organization as a whole was their place in the ranks of the Empire, and why a group so seasoned in the dark side of the Force would not even live to see the beginning of the Galactic Civil War. By the time, an era of Luke Skywalker and the Rebellion, currently there is only a single surviving member of the Inquisitorius that we know of. That is the mysterious and powerful Force wielder known as Merrick, which will be premiering in the Ahsoka series in just a few weeks. So why exactly did the Inquisitors go extinct so quickly, and barely made an impact in a galaxy at large? Before we dive into this holocron though, we'd like to thank today's sponsor, Onasaber. If you would like a high quality replica or original designed saber, Onasaber is the place to go. Instead of venturing across the stars for parts and your crystal, Onasaber will deliver a saber to you with free shipping. And currently they are running a special where every saber on the website is 30% off, from themed to replicas and more. So be sure to check it out for the limited time in the description down below. Thanks again to Onasaber for sponsoring today's holocron, and let's begin. The answer to the fate of the Inquisitors stems from the very teachers and leaders in Lord Sidious and Lord Vader. Although it was never said to their faces, the two Dark Lords had a particular disdain for the race that was the Inquisitors. They viewed them as nothing more than useless pawns that could be eliminated if even proven slightly annoying or less productive than the Siths believed they should be. But it was not always like this. In the very beginning of the Empire, Sidious needed to establish a group of Dark Jedi that were loyal to his rule for one very important purpose. Sidious needed a group of bloodhounds that knew the Jedi, and since of course the Inquisitors were former Jedi, they proved to be the perfect breed. The Inquisitors were the second wave to hunt and eliminate the Jedi that survived the initial clone attack, and with the might of the newly burgeoning Lord Vader at their backs and the resources of the Empire, their reputation grew exponentially among the stars in this brand new era. The Inquisitors performed this task wonderfully, but as the Jedi became less and less prominent, so was the need for more Inquisitors. And as the very Darksiders fell in battle and the years of the Great Hunt continued, Sidious nor Vader saw any need to replenish the Inquisitor ranks. Lord Sidious believed that of the Jedi present 15 years after Order 66 and the Clone Wars concluded, that the ineptitude of the Inquisitors would not be enough to squeeze the last remaining remnants of the Dead Order, and therefore Sidious saw no need to recruit more Inquisitors as more and more of them fell in battle. As the years progressed, the goals of the Empire evolved along with it. The Jedi were a threat of the past, and these soldiers who were bred to hunt and kill Jedi lost their usefulness, as their very purpose was literally blinked from the star maps. With that said, the whereabouts of two other prominent Inquisitors is currently up in the air, although the rest were murdered by either Jedi, Vader, Maul, or by the command of Sidious himself. As Sidious even somewhat was disgusted with the fallen Jedi that broke so easily after the destruction of their wider order, leaving a sour taste in the Dark Lord's mouth, even as he used them as his pawns. The ultimate and terrifying fate of the Grand Inquisitor does not end above the world of Mustafar as the Rebels series depicts, but instead, the Grand Inquisitor's story is evolved, and the depravity and outright vile nature of Darth Vader is revealed, as it is shown that Darth Vader has used an ancient and corrupted dark side technique to lay claim to the very soul of the Grand Inquisitor, forcing the Inquisitor to burn eternally in his final moments of failure. Vader then locked the spirit of the Inquisitor away in a High Republic outpost, along with ancient Jedi lore and lightsabers, as the goal of this deteriorating servant was to murder any who came in search of Jedi knowledge. This marks one of the most cruel acts in all of the lore, as Vader tied the tormented soul of the Inquisitor to his own will, never letting them pass on through the Force and remaining forever a puppet, one cloaked in the fires of his last moments of life. After failing to stop a young Luke Skywalker from stealing Jedi knowledge, the Grand Inquisitor was again visited by Lord Vader. The Pau'an pleaded with his master, begging to be set free from the curse that the latter had bestowed upon him. Vader, however, was not satisfied with his pawn's work and refused. The Inquisitor looked on as the latter departed from the place that he could not. repeating to himself that there were things worse than death before fading away into the dark. The other Inquisitor that we know not the fate of is that of Riva, the only known Inquisitor to escape the dark path with her life. After surviving an attempt on her life by Lord Vader, Riva attempted to take her revenge and kill a young Luke. However, with the help of Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, Riva was able to break free from Vader and herself go on the run. And thus, we reach the last of all the Inquisitors in the form of Merrick in Ahsoka. Merrick is unique as the Inquisitors have not been a prominent part of the Empire for nearly a decade, and according to all known resources, Merrick is the very last of his kind, having survived several years past the events of Return of the Jedi and the destruction of the Empire itself. It is unknown exactly who or what Merrick is, although we do know he has aligned with Thrawn and the Dark Jedi warriors known as Baylan and Shin in this new era. Some have speculated that Merrick may have been a secret apprentice to Lord Vader before Luke became a prominent figure in the galaxy, and thus is far more skilled than the rest. But this all of right now is just conjecture and speculation. But now, my friends and acolytes, this is what happened to the Inquisitors in their terrifying and tragic fate in a galaxy where they were moved around as unimportant and expendable holdovers of a order long demolished. Most of the Inquisitors were actually murdered by the hands of Darksiders themselves, as Vader killed more than 3, and the former Sith Lord Maul laid claim to the lives of more than 3 Inquisitors himself. Ironic that these Darkside warriors would ultimately be killed by their own masters. But anyway, my friends and acolytes, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the final remnants of the Inquisitors in Ahsoka and in Merrick? And what are your thoughts on how the Inquisitors ultimately went extinct among the stars? Thanks again to Ona Saber for sponsoring today's Holocron. Be sure to check them out using the link in the description down below, and may the Force be with you.